Cool. Yeah, everything's looking awesome.
Other than that,
No, I think that's what.
the voice.
What? That's what we want.
Am I going nuts?
What's up?
I'm going nuts.
Great. Okay. I think we're going to get started. Thank you, everyone, for coming to our workshop. We're the Canadian Young Hydrologists Society. Yeah, and let's get going. I'm just going to introduce what we've got for you today. But first, we start with a land acknowledgement. As we gather here today, we acknowledge we are on Treaty 6 territory and the homeland of the Métis. We pay our respects to the First Nation and Métis ancestors of this place and reaffirm our relationship with one another. And I think it's also important to acknowledge that a lot of us come from other places and do research on other lands. And so we have a link down there. If you don't know what lands you're studying or researching on, you can go find out. So just quickly, a little background or schedule of what we're going to do. We've got a little basic intro of figure aesthetics with Larissa and Celsi, and then a figure critique with Julia, a demonstration and editing using Inkscape from our esteemed guest, Dr. Lauren Summers, and then a conclusion and summary with some take-home messages, and I believe a shameless plug from Joseph. Perfect. And then a nice little quote to kick us off. Philosophical lexicon introduced during the 18th century, the term aesthetic has come to designate, among other things, a kind of object, a kind of judgment, a kind of attitude, a kind of experience, and a kind of value. And that's a great spot to start. Welcome.
Okay, so hi everyone, my name is Larissa. I'm just going to give you kind of a little background to set the stage and get our minds thinking about figure aesthetics. So I'm just going to kind of go over kind of why aesthetics matter in figures. So we're going to approach this workshop today with the assumption that you've already chosen a type of figure. We're going to assume that it's, an appropriate figure type. But there's still a lot of choices that you need to make with aesthetics. So things like where you position objects or labels, different symbol shapes, different colors, if you're using a line, if you're using styling. And so we're going to look at those things. So this is kind of going to look at an example of why it matters. So I think the figure might be slightly cut off on the edge, but that's okay. I think you can still get the idea. So these are two figures. They are from a textbook that looks at data visualization, but I thought it was interesting because along the x-axis, both of them show that it is a time series. So you're looking at temperature, monthly temperature across different areas. So 4 different locations. The figure on the left, so figure A, I think is the one we think of most commonly, where it is a time series, there's a line, connected points, and you can, really look at the degree of temperature and kind of make some assumptions or interpretations from that. But the figure on the right shows the exact same information. It is monthly temperatures, but instead you see more of a spatial comparison. So the y-axis is actually separated by the location. So aesthetics really are just helpful in highlighting what your main message is, and that's kind of why we're today gonna focus on that. So there's kind of 3 guiding questions. I scoured tons of textbooks and came to the conclusion there's essentially 3 questions you have to ask. The first one, and this is unanimously supported, is how is the key messaging being highlighted? So in that previous example, if you cared about making spatial comparisons, you'd highlight that maybe by your y-axis. So that's what that kind of first question means. The second one is looking at visual hierarchy, so where your eyes look first, and commonly the use of color can kind of help guide, but there's some other approaches. And the third one is just figure balance, so if it's all kind of texty, or if it's all kind of colors, if it's all numbers, or if it's all just lines, looking at the spacing, if there's white space. And essentially, these questions become a checklist. So that's kind of what we're going to use today. So the first thing that we can really control in aesthetics is colors. Colors are used for three things. So the first thing is really to separate groups or classes. So maybe you have group 1 being one color and group 2 being another color. The second thing we use color for is really to provide numerical data. So we can use a scale. So here I've just used a gradient, shows the exact same information as the first figure, just a different way to show it. And then the third thing that we can use color for is to highlight key messaging. So again, this is the exact same figure as the first one. But if we were looking at maybe a specific level where, say, in water, something becomes problematic, we might have a threshold, and I would highlight the values that go above that threshold. So that's really highlighting kind of a key message. This last one is really helpful for presentations. So that was where we see it the most. But there are a lot of considerations in color. So colors can have inherent messaging. So you can, there's kind of an impression of color where we typically associate things like red with bad or like alarming or something that's negative. And we normally think of green as something good and something to kind of continue with. So there is a little bit of messaging that you have to think of with color schemes. The second thing is, depending on the colors that you're using, this was an example. So using that red-green example, this was just an example I found where they look at different operating systems and they compare it using a scale. So the first figure uses red to describe a Windows operating system and orange for Mac, and then it goes all the way to like a greeny blue color for others. So when you look at it, you almost think that they're inferring that Windows is bad, and that's not really what they're trying to say. The second use where you're using colors, where you can really see it's a scale where something is low and that's red. So maybe based on the data, that means it's bad. So just different ways of looking at what the messaging of your color means. But you also want to consider accessibility. So there is color blindness to think about, but also where this figure is going to end up. So sometimes if you're making figures for a publication, maybe a newspaper where it's black and white, or if you're a student and you're printing it at a printer at school that might be black and white, what that figure is really going to look like. But going into kind of the color blindness, I'm sure everyone's kind of looked at this because I think it's a little bit more talked about now, but of course certain colors are probably colors to stay away from if you are considering color blindness. So I have a better example. So if we chose this figure as our color palette, if you have normal vision, if you're someone like me, you do see a green, you see a different kind of red, you see a blue, you see a pink, and it does look different. But depending on kind of your color vision ability, it might not look the same. So this is an example of what it would look like if you had a red-green sensitivity. So that is the most common color blindness. And essentially your reds and your greens start to look the same depending on the shade. So those are probably color schemes that you want to stay away from. So going back to that inherent messaging slide where we had reds and greens, the first thing right away I realized is that red and green scales are probably not the best to use, because if you do have a color blindness, it's all going to look the same. So that's number one. So there are ways to kind of avoid this. There's tons of simulators online. This is an example of one that I find really handy. It gives you actual the RGB values. You can pick a scale, and then it simulates what those colors would look like if you were someone with a color blindness. And so kind of a way to avoid this as well. So the first option is just using one of those simulators. The second is just to, avoid relying solely on color. So this would be an example where you're using, just color, the middle using more of like a pattern instead of relying just on different colors. And the third one is just using labels. So if you had a color blindness, this is what it would look like. And you can see the middle one is still really easily identifiable. So this is a way to maybe be more accessible. And the kind of last consideration with color is visual competition. So this is looking at how many colors are you using at once. So there is some general rules Depending on the sources, it actually varied anywhere from 5 to 7. So take that number with a little bit of hesitancy, but that's the general consensus from a few different sources. And when you come and look at a figure, if you have too many different colors, this is what it would look like, and it's just chaotic, and you have no idea where to look. So if you're just glancing at this figure, you might look at the really bright colors first, but you have no idea what any of it means, and it's just really chaotic. So that's really what we talk about when we're thinking of hierarchy, like where your eyes are going first. So the next thing, in terms of aesthetics, the most common thing would be symbols and lines. There is like a whole realm of study on the psychology of geometry. So I am in no means an expert on this, not going to dive into this, but similarly to colors, different shapes can also have associations. And when we think of symbols and lines and shapes, when we think of like a thick shape, automatically you're going to think that's probably more important. So those are the kind of inherent messaging you have to think about with symbols and lines. So I have an example, and it's kind of a fun example. So circles. There has been tons and tons of research that has shown psychologically, circles people consider to be the most eye-friendly. So if you think of maps, we use dots, not squares. When you think of little fun cartoons for children or stuffed animals, the circles end up being the cute ones that people like. So marketing has really picked up on this. Logos usually are built on circles. There's cartoons, toys. So that's actually why. So it's the most common symbol type, and whether or not you knew that, research shows it's actually the most visually appealing. But when we think of some other symbols and other shapes, depending on the discipline, there are some, again, terms that are commonly associated. So if you're in hydrology, the water table is typically shown by an inverted triangle. So if you were showing a figure and the water table is of any importance in what you're showing, you kind of want to be careful that you're not using triangles in a different way, because someone can look at that and just assume that's what it was supposed to mean. So just really knowing kind of your discipline and if there's any specific symbols. So some best practices that we found, using contrasting shape types is obviously more beneficial. So the top example, it's a little bit small to see, but just using contrasting shapes, so some smooth ones and some sharp edges. If you just rely on the same type of shape, it's just too similar. And when I scoured all of the textbooks, every single one said using no more than 3 distinct shape types. And then after that, if you need to add more to modify color, size, fill, or make it like empty with no fill. And that was the recommendation that we found. So, and then the other kind of thing is you can also use symbols to highlight things. So this is coming back to like that key messaging and what you really want to highlight. So this is an example looking at Canada. It's a political map. And so the purpose of the map was to show you cities and towns. In this example, the filled ones, the ones that are all black, are the capital cities, and then the less important, but the major not the major cities, but the not capital cities, they were hollow. So that's kind of an example of how you would highlight something that's important. The other example is this map in particular has thicker lines for the roads, because those are what people usually use to travel, and then thin lines for the rivers. So that's kind of an example there. The third thing that I'm looking at and that we'll look at is positioning of figure elements. So this is thinking about white space, but this really does depend on figure use. So there's macro white space, which is like around the figure. So if you're placing it on a slide, is it the whole slide, or do you going to have white space around it? It could be if you were putting it in a publication, like a report of some sort. You don't want a line of text, no space, and then the figure, there's just no breaks. So that's macro, but there's also micro. So within the figure, if you just have the entire space filled or you leave white space, that's something to think about. But then there's other things as well. Are you adding in grid lines? Do you need labels? So this can really add complications, and that is where we want to think of that visual hierarchy. So not making it too chaotic, not adding too many things. So that brings us to kind of a final little checklist. So now that we're all thinking about aesthetics, the first thing we will think about is how the key messaging has been highlighted. The second is looking at visual hierarchy. So what are you looking at first? What is the most important? Where do your eyes go next? And then the third is looking at how the figure is balanced, if you have white space. And again, this does depend on the use, whether it's for a publication or whether it's for a presentation. So just getting a little more things to think about. When we're looking at messaging, how we're highlighting that, you really do only want to focus on one or two key messages. Some really great figures are out there with tons of information, but it can be really hard to interpret. So you might want to just focus on one or two key messages when we're talking about figure aesthetics. You could point out a million different things with a bunch of neon colors, but that's going to be too much. So focusing on just one thing. So if you want to highlight one thing with color, just focus on one message. Coming into the visual hierarchy, that's the whole idea of what you're looking at first. And the best question I got was from a webinar. The question was asked, how much explaining do you need to orient your viewer? If you need to point out everything to look at to your viewer, you probably aren't guiding them well. So how much explanation do you need to do to kind of show your viewer what to look at? And that's how you can know, that's how you can tell whether you have good guidance. And then thinking about just background and foreground. So this came up in map making. If you have a little inset, is that distracting? Is that the most important thing? What is really your foreground? What is the background? So thinking about that hierarchy as well. And then the final thing, pretty self-intuitive, but just looking at balance. So that can be anything. That can be colors if they're visually appealing, if they're appropriate, if there's any kind of inherent messaging, looking at symbols, did they make sense? Is there too many? Is it, too chaotic? Is it too zoomed out or zoomed in? Just really looking at the balance of white space to data. So now I'm going to have Julia come up, and she's going to now, having all of this information, we're going to kind of look at some figures and see what improvements we would suggest. Keeping in mind, these aren't bad figures. They're just figures that we're going to use, and we're going to kind of collectively as a group maybe come up with what we would maybe change for it. So I'll pass it over to Julia.
Okay, so yeah, we just want to apply what they talked about today to these figures, and obviously positive, negative feedback, it's all good, but make sure it's constructive, obviously. And as she said, I didn't pick any of these because I thought they were bad. I just kind of went through and I thought either they highlighted, I think we really talked about a lot of color today, highlighted maybe the good use of color, or maybe not so good use of color, and also just maybe figures that were trying to explain a lot of information. And I wanted some feedback from you guys. Is there a better, more efficient way to explain that information, or maybe a more accessible way to do it? So anyways, this is you guys have to talk for this one. So just raise your hand or shout out if you guys have any initial critiques. This one's just a nice, simple one, so.
It's all yellow.
Yeah. Yeah, this one I felt like was a pretty simple one, but I thought that, they do have some colors in it, but I don't really know why they went with it just yellow brown. I will say that they did a good job of the line types. This kind of subcategories were dashed versus solid. So I think that's a really good way to visually explain the different lines and kind of convey that information. I also think in the figure caption, I think it said what that y-axis was. But I think if you have to go to your figure caption, it's not a good enough figure. And I think you need to put your full units of what you're measuring in the actual graph. Does anyone have any other comments? This one's pretty simple, so. Okay, this one's a little more complicated. Yeah.
There's a couple of too many bright colors jumping out at me, especially in the cross-section part, like blue, the red, purple, and then the green just feels busy.
Yeah, I agree. I feel like they're very contrasting, which is good in a way, but it's also that is where my eye goes immediately, like you said.
Yeah, but it feels like.
Yeah. Did you have something? Yeah, that's a good point. Definitely. I'm gonna start over here and then work around.
I feel like the inverted triangle color or differentiate the bottom part is a little similar to the arrows that are going through.
Yeah, I agree. I feel like there's a lot of arrows going on. Yeah. Yeah, that's true. I think simplifying the amount of labels and putting them either all together or kind of making certain types of labels distinct from other types of labels if they want to have all of them in here is good. Yeah.
Having a lot of fluxes that they're representing several arrows, and also all the arrows are exactly the same as each other, those that are representing the flux and also the ones that are just pointing out something. So I would suggest using different thicknesses or sizes of arrows rather than several to represent the magnitude of the flux if they want to do that, but also just using different lines for different reasons.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. It's very unclear what's a process versus what's just a label on the figure. Yeah. Any other ones? Okay. Oh, sorry. I got distracted.
It's just too much for your brain.
I picked this one. I thought it was kind of nice. I thought they really had nice colors going on, but I think for me it was they weren't contrasting enough. Even though it's kind of visually appealing, I felt like it wasn't really clear. I'm not colorblind, but if I was colorblind, the spring, summer, autumn would not be clear, I don't think. And I do like that they had all the labels underneath, because at least if you were colorblind you could distinguish that. But I think it would be much more powerful if you got rid of those labels and just had the colors be distinct in a way.
And also, I see no sign for the stars that goes in the background, but connects different categories with each other, different seasons, but it doesn't tell what are those.
Yeah, that's true. I think that would be in the figure or the figure caption, but yeah, I think it would be helpful to have a little legend on the side too. Yeah.
I'm thinking the stars might actually, maybe I'm wrong, be significance levels of something, some sort. Sometimes people do that, but again, they don't make that obvious. But yeah, you can see sometimes, I don't know, maybe they do connect to the same thing. The boxes around them are weird. So if they're saying there's a significant difference between spring and autumn, with this level of significance in this particular plot, it's just too much to look at.
Yeah, it can be a lot.
Yeah, I don't know how they would have done it differently, table or something.
Yeah. The other thing is, oh, sorry, no, you can go first.
It's bizarre that essentially the three columns of column to but I do understand why the columns are a little larger because there's more, but not really. There's 4 points in it. It's just bizarre. Color.
Yeah, it's not very symmetrical, which I think is a good point. It's nice to have symmetry between your panels. I don't really understand why they're not the same size either boxes. Yeah, so I think that's a good point. The other thing is, this might be nitpicky of me, but I think they put the panel color of the spring, summer, autumn over top the box plots. So if you actually look between the same whatever box plot between each season, they're actually a slightly different color, which isn't a big deal. But I think if you were colorblind, maybe you're well, this one's a little bit different too. So I think that would make it confusing too. Sorry, these are kind of small, hard to read. Yeah, go ahead.
If that was a full page figure, maybe the writing big enough, but about the exposure, it's almost full page.
That's true. Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, Kobe.
I think I could be really close and still not see the writing on that colorful map. I didn't even notice it.
Yeah. I think definitely the like one on the left for sure. They've got yellow writing on top of like yellowy brown background. Very hard to see. They do have the same label on the second one, but I would say even those ones are almost hard to read. And even the points, like the green kind of blends in with the blue and yellow color. So I think I personally thought the colors in the second one were like pretty, but they weren't conveying enough information in terms of, I don't think there's any legend for that color on the right. So I don't know which one's the higher snow cover frequency or the lower one. Yeah.
Did you say that the symbols are like, they're the points on each of the left and right figures are for the same thing?
I think they're supposed to be like the same locations that they're denoting.
Okay. And it's probably a little weird that they're using like a little thumbtack for the one and then like circles.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. I will say the one thing I did like about this figure is, I mean, it's hard to see the bottom graphs, but I really like when people use the axis colors to like correspond to the lines on it. Also, you probably can't read, but they used red for temperature, which I think is really good. People really associate temperature with like red as a warm color, but they used blue for albedo instead of precipitation, which in my mind, I think that's a little weird. I think it could be better, but okay, I'll go to the next one. Oh, sorry.
It looks like these are all the same color bar, so I would personally suggest making one having a key figure so we can actually see the colors. I also think that the individual points should probably be a bit maybe bigger, because overall looking at this, like I can't even tell that well. It's the point.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I kind of picked this one because I thought when you zoom into one plot, it actually looks like really nice. But I think maybe the authors just didn't keep in mind, like they've made a 6-panel plot. You got to scale up the sides and you have to scale up this. Even the scale bar is a little small for me. So I think that's important to consider. Yeah.
Their points aren't outlined, but there's a 0.0 that looks very close to white, and so I think some of the data gets actually like lost with a white like background for the landscape. I'd almost want to do like a darker, like a gray landscape background so that the white actually pops a little bit, because I feel like we're losing data. Because I'm like, is that a shade of white? Is that a smudge on the screen? I don't know.
Yeah, definitely. I agree. Larissa, do you want to speak? Or yeah, you go ahead.
The geologist, I think they got lost in the salt. Like the stuff going on the
Yeah, I agree. I felt like, I mean, I really like a conceptual model because, you know, if you had to read this in paragraph form, which they probably still have, that's so hard to visualize for me. So I think the like thought was there, but just if you have a whole line of, you know, colors, that's just way too many. And I think the other thing is, you know, it's nice to have the land cover use overland zones, but some of those subcategories are way too small. You can't even see them. So it's kind of like, there's not really a point in including those. So it's kind of how much information do you really need to convey? And if they do need to convey that, then probably a different plot would be better. Yeah. Yeah. I also think like in the left panel, there's all these little X's on the back. And I think it's kind of one of those things where it's probably default mode, like when you have grid lines in your plot. But I think it's just such a small thing, but it really distracts from the rest of the plot. And it's kind of funny. I feel like for figure making, your eye goes to like the worst thing on the screen if there's something bad. So you really do have to be very detail oriented with them. Yeah. Okay. I think there's one more. Oh, no, there's not. Does anyone have any like comments or any, discussion just about general figure making they want to talk about? Yeah.
Sorry, also about this, I was thinking, well, there's definitely too much stuff on it, but I've seen like other figures when they do have a lot, at least like with colors, like they also do like shades or fills. So like a polka dot fill or like a stripy fill or something like that would at least help.
Yeah.
But I would still reduce the amount of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Can I add something?
Yes.
So if one of the things I thought when I saw this legend is like, that is way too many colors. Like for this, I would suggest limiting your color palette to like, like they said, like up to 5 to 7 colors max. And then like, using polka dots or like textures or something to differentiate, because this is a little vicious. Like,
Okay. Okay, now I'm going to hand it off to Dr. Lauren Summers. She's going to give us an Inkscape demonstration. Do you want to sit here? Yeah.
sure, whatever,
whatever works.
whatever. I guess if I need the mic, maybe I need this. Yeah. Thank you. That's good. I guess I gotta share my screen here. Let's see how this goes. Okay. Looks good. All right, am I all good? Okay. Great. Okay, hi everybody. So I'm going to give a little bit of like a nuts and bolts quick overview of using Inkscape, the graphics editor. But I want to get a feel from you guys. What do you use to make your figures right now? So does anybody use Inkscape? Okay, so a smattering. How many people use PowerPoint? Okay, quite a few. Does anybody use anything else? Yeah? Cool, yeah? Yeah? Python, you say? Yep, so absolutely. So, and I would say like, even if you're making figures in Inkscape, you're still gonna need to make them in MATLAB. And then usually it's those additional tweaks or changes that you can make in Inkscape. Was there another one? Yeah? What is it? Figma. Okay, I don't know that one. Cool. Great. Yeah. Cool. Great. Yeah, and then there's, a really popular one for, maybe people who want to pay for this kind of product would be something like Adobe Illustrator. So I know some people use that as well, but it is expensive. The great thing about Inkscape, it is free and open source, and it works natively on Macs and PCs, so you can download it and it's ready to go. So we've got a few people who have used it before, but I'll just give you kind of an intro to what it looks like, and I'll give you a little bit of a demo so that if you do decide you want to start using it, maybe you have a little bit of an orientation there. Before I open up the program here, so this is what the Inkscape interface looks like. So you've got along the top here the same kinds of basic file tools that you would get in like Microsoft Word. If you want to, this I should say here, this is your workspace. So this is where you're actually working on the figure. You can see my mouse, yes. Over on the left-hand side is all the drawing tools. So you want to make shapes, you want to make lines, text, whatever. Those tools are over here. And then there's a couple spaces that change depending on what tool you're using. So there's this second line of tools for whatever you kind of got open. And then in this window, you can minimize or maximize this, but different options for different tools will pop up in this space. So right now I've got the fill and stroke toolbox open, so I can change the colors of lines and shapes with that. And then along the bottom there is just a color palette. I wanted to mention a couple things. So these are some of the skills that I'm going to show you how to do in Inkscape. And just wanted to clarify a couple things before we get started. just the difference between vector and raster files. So most of you are probably familiar with this, maybe from working with GIS systems. But vector files they have lines or polygons that go from point A to point B. So that's how the data is stored. So when you zoom in, they remain sharp because it's kind of redrawing those lines for you. And some vector formats would be SVG, so scalable vector graphic, PDFs, EPS. Those are all vector formats. So if you're going to make something in Inkscape, as much as possible, you want to be importing vector graphics. It's not always possible. Certain maps, color maps need to be rasters, and that's fine. But whenever possible, import a vector. Rasters are pixels, right? So there's each pixel has a color or a value, and together that makes your image. When you zoom in on a raster graphic, you can see the pixels. So we will make our Inkscape drawing with vector, and then I usually export a raster for the final publication or whatever. Okay, so these are some of our key tools, but I will actually have other kind of lists of those. So what I'm going to do, I dug back with a former master's student and looked at some of the initial graphs he sent me for his thesis, pulled together some of those, and then comparing those to what we finally put in a publication. So he had sent me a bunch of hydrometeorological data. So you guys may work with similar data. So he kind of sent it in a couple different chunks. All the time, all of the text was too small. He's not here, so I can make fun of him. So basically, we talked about how do we pull this together into something that's a little bit more cohesive and communicative. So this was what we finally ended up with. So we've got temperature, precip, stuff like that, groundwater levels. So some of the stuff is easiest to do in MATLAB, in Python, in R, whatever you're using to generate your plots, or Excel. So there's certainly things that it's just you should do them in the programming language that you're using. So we started with that. So okay, let's put them all in one plot and go from there. Relatedly, my advice is to get your plots as close as possible with R, MATLAB, whatever, because you're probably going to have to make them multiple times, right? You realize there was that one little mistake where you got a little bit more data. So automate as much as possible, and then it's the final tweaks that you do, I would say, in something like Inkscape. Okay, so what I'm going to show you now, I'm going to import the multi-panel figure. I'm going to talk about grouping and ungrouping in Inkscape. We're going to change some colors of lines and thicknesses and styles, move some text around, use guidelines, and export a figure. And then I've got, so this is our kind of basic data figure, and then I've got some schematic to show. But let's open up Inkscape. So here's my Inkscape window. Easiest way to import a file in Inkscape, you can just drag it over. So let me find the right file. This would be figure 3 old. So I drag that over, and it asks me a little bit about how I want to import that. I want to be able to edit everything inside of it, so the default is good. It's okay. And so first thing is it's very large. Import's very large compared to my page size, which I've already defined. So I want to make this smaller. But one important thing is I want to keep the dimensions or the proportions the same here. And so this little lock symbol up here is going to let me do that. So I'm going to bring this down to the size of what I want to work with. You can see I already had a practice run, so that's already in there. All right, so let's zoom in here. So when you import, so this works a little bit differently depending on where you're importing from. So this is from MATLAB, and when it exports a vector graphic, every line, every box is like grouped together. So we have to ungroup them first. I've got this. If I click on an object, it is selected. So I go up here, object, and ungroup. And this one's, I'm pretty sure this one's grouped twice, just to be tricky. There we go. So now you can see all these other dotted lines popped up. So where before I could only move the whole thing together, now I can move individual parts of it. I may want to group things together later though. So say I want to keep these like legends all together. It's a common thing you might want to do. Then I would go, and I would group them. And then that way, for the time being, I can just move them by themselves. And that's actually one of the things that we ended up doing was putting the legend on the bottom. So I can roughly get that there to start. Okay, so now that I'm ungrouped, I can say, we heard from Larissa about, using color in your lines. Yes, please. Great question. Yes, there is. Yep. So it's over here. This little symbol here is the layers tab. So I don't have this nicely organized in layers, but you can. And if you're more organized than me, maybe you do. But yes, a great question. It's much like GIS in that sense, where you have layers. You can put objects in those layers. Really handy. You can make them visible or not visible with these little eye symbols. You can lock them. That gets really handy when you have a lot of shapes that are close to each other and you want to select some but not the others. Yeah, so absolutely. And then there's, it also allows you, I think it's in another tab, there's a way to shift things. Yeah, here are all the objects in my drawing. So I can also shift the drawing order. So if I want to draw one thing over another, I can drag them and I can move them that way. Yeah. Great question. Yeah. Yeah, it really has a lot of capabilities, and I certainly don't use all of them. I kind of just use what I've learned by trial and error. But yes, maybe someday I'll keep track of all my layers. All right, so one of the tools that you would use all the time is the fill and stroke tools. So I'll pick a line here and we can make it dotted, or we can change that. I'm very good at this with my left hand. Here we go. Okay. There we go. All right. So I think I may have to ungroup this to start as well. There's sort of subgroups in here. So I'm going to select this red line and I'm going to click this button, which is the fill and stroke tool. So fill is, the color inside. So this is just a line, doesn't have any fill. So the X means no fill. If we wanted to put fill in, we could do that, but it would look weird. And that's not what we want to do. So I'm going to go over into the stroke style. So I can change the color here and make it whatever color I want. Hue, intensity, all that stuff you can control. And then the stroke styles where you can make it dotted. So I love a dotted line. So there's a dotted line. And actually I think I've still got fill on, so let me turn that off. Good. Change your line style. So they've got all sorts of different options. So actually you could make, if you had many lines, many different dotted styles for you to choose from. What else did I have on my little list here? Oh, guidelines is a really good one that you might not realize as you're going through. So when you're making these multi-panel figures, your eye loves to see alignment, right? You want to see everything's like perfectly aligned. And there's multiple ways to do that in Inkscape. And a good one is these guidelines. So you can drag them out. So basically from this ruler kind of area, you can drag out these guidelines and they can help you make sure that everything is perfectly aligned. And you can do it vertically or you can do it horizontally. They don't print or anything. They're not in your drawing. And then you can delete them if you are done with them. Another good tool in that sphere is the align toolbox. So if I had actually, let me ungroup this stuff. And say like for whatever reason it got messed up or things were not, my legend was not nicely aligned. I can highlight this stuff and go to the align and distribute tool. Move this over. And then there's all these different options. So you can get things just perfectly aligned with one click. So if I want the left, kind of the left margin aligned, I can use this tool and really quickly just get things perfectly aligned. And those little details make a difference to your eye. How are we doing for time?
It says 45 minutes.
When did I start?
32-ish.
Okay, cool. All right, I'll skip ahead. I'll just do one last little thing, and then I won't belabor the point here. Any questions? Just please speak up. So I wanted to also point out that you can make all sorts of cool schematics, and it's not just graphs that you might be making. So these are a couple of schematics that I've made over the years in Inkscape. We just critiqued some schematics, so I'm a little nervous about what we're all thinking about them now. This is one I actually just made last week. Reviewer wanted to see a conceptual model, which I was actually happy. I love to draw a conceptual model. So I thought I'd just talk briefly about how you might do something like that in Inkscape. So let me open up the conceptual model. Okay. So what I like to do, I would start with a paper sketch of whatever I'm trying to get at, to kind of rough it in. And then I make all sorts of kind of prototypes in Inkscape to kind of get the idea for how I want to do it. So simple line drawings, and this was kind of my original thought. Okay, I want to do it like this. Now I want to make it a block diagram. And then I kind of start roughing in. So the tool in Inkscape is there's like this polyline tool. It's over here. And you can make it so that, every line is an angle, or you can make it so every kind of corner is a curve. And so you could just if I, just want to start with make some kind of block diagram. If I hold Control, it'll snap to vertical lines. Also very handy tip. Okay, so made a box. I can give it some color. Oops. And make it gray this time. So the best thing about this is that, so you draw something and you can go back after the fact and edit all the points. So yes. Yeah. I'm just using a mouse. Yeah, I know people will do this drawing on their tablet. I have not yet to do that, but I would love to. But yeah, what's great is because you can kind of draw it with the mouse and go back and edit the points later, it makes it really possible to make shapes that you definitely can't mouse the first time. Or you can try 500 times and it's still not quite what you're looking for. But here, so with this little shape edit points tool, I can go back and change, exactly where those points are. So this one, say I'd want this to be, perfectly square, so I can move it out to where it should be. What I can also do is make certain points curved and certain points not curved. So right now I've got one point selected, so I can make this auto curve and make it curved. What that's really great for is these kind of these landscapey block diagrams. So if I draw in, I'll draw one roughly in my polyline tool. So I'm just gonna, and there's many ways you could do this, but I'm just gonna start by kind of making it this angular thing. Okay, there's some kind of hill over here. It goes up high, and I don't know, I guess it just comes right down. So it's a little lumpy here. Let's bring that down. So right now it's angular, but I can edit. Say I want the corners to still be sharp, but I can select all of these other points and make them. I'm gonna go shift, select all these, make them curves, and then I can adjust the curves as well, depending on if I want to get into that level of detail. So now it's a curved line instead of a sharp line. So one thing that I had, I'll get some input from you guys. So this is my final schematic. Also, let me just check if I had any other. Oh yeah, a couple. Yeah, let me actually mention the eyedropper tool. We did the smooth and correct lines and the clip art. Yeah, okay, so if you are making, if you have a color palette in mind, this is really nice. So like if I wanted to change the color of this and let's see here, fill and stroke. And there was like another color that I wanted to replicate. You can use this little eyedropper tool and it'll just, you just hover over the color you want and you will get that exact color. So you can exactly, so we saw that box plot where the colors were slightly different. That would be a way you could fix that. Yeah. Okay, so this conceptual model got feedback from a co-author that he would like to see this look a little bit steeper. So I'm going to ask you guys, I'm not sure exactly how to do that. If you have any great ideas, I would love to hear it. So basically this is like a very steep valley. So we want to make it look steeper. And yeah, so I'll show you what I'm thinking. If you have any great ideas, I would love to hear them. But basically I drew this shape, and it's actually, you can make your shapes transparent or semi-transparent. And so that's also in the fill and stroke, this opacity line that you can drag whichever way. So I kind of was like, okay, I'll try and make it look like a shadow. So I drew the polyline, and then I made all the edges curved and kind of got them to where I wanted. And I kind of got it in, where did I put it? Somewhere around here, I thought I had it. Yeah, kind of, there we go. Let me move this. And then it's in front of a bunch of stuff. So I'm going to use these to put, I want to move it down so that it's not in front of my river. Should go down eventually. There is, the river came forward. Oh, one too far. One back up. I might have a delay here with my clicking. There we go. Okay, so I was like, okay, I can kind of add a shadow, and then I added had these additional polylines to try and make it look like there was sort of like a hill coming down. That's what I got so far. But basically, yeah. Any brilliant ideas? Yes. Add a line. Cool. Okay, so a shift in perspective to. Cool. Great. Yeah, we'll go here and then there.
So I don't know if you consider this, but there's a way to add gradients to the color, like to the shape itself. And you could gradient the top to be lighter and the bottom to be darker, just to show like, I don't know, some kind of steepness thing. But there's a way on the left, like one of those tools on, I think, yeah, it's like the box with the two dots on the corner on the left-hand side. If you click it, you can add like a gradient thing. You can control the gradient of the object and like do that kind of thing.
Yeah, with this like this gradient tool.
Yeah, and just like that. But I'm thinking more of like the shadow shape. So you can control the shadow shape to kind of show like when things like make it like darker at the bottom to show like maybe it's steeper there instead, and so that it's not as like. Maybe it blends a little more. I don't know if that would be an option.
Yeah, I get you. Yeah, of the shadow shape, make it dark at the bottom. I like it. I like it. And there was one back there.
This is super nitpicky. How about the little like tributaries coming in, making sure they break and like change your angle at the same point where your shadows start.
No, that's a good idea. No, I think that's great. Awesome. Okay, thank you guys very much. Very yes.
I got a question as a fellow professor. How long is this thing to do?
That's a great question. This box diagram, I think it took me a day in between other stuff. So I would say it took me, I kind of started it one day and it wasn't flowing. I didn't have the right brain energy, but I would say like it was a day where I had a few meetings, but not a ton, and I got it done in a day. Is that too much or too little, Dr. Krylik? Totally. Yeah. The back and forth with an illustrator is, tough as well. Yeah. So I think I think that's pretty much, so those are a few kind of getting started with Inkscape tips, and a few other advice. I already said this first one. Yeah, try and make things as close as you can before you start working in Inkscape, because you don't want to make all those like little tweaks many times, as much as possible. Inkscape also has a really large user community, so it's super easy to Google things. So it's like, and it has a lot of tools that are a bit more advanced. Like it has this trace bitmap tool that's really cool. So you can take an image, or you can take somebody else's graphics. Like if you need a graphic for a tree, and you can trace it so you have a vectorized graphic that you can use. So that's really handy. Yeah, and just like overall, like general, like common things I see are just access text being too small, and default colors. I think I haven't seen a lot of default colors at this conference, so you guys probably know this, but when it's the orange and blue, that's like the default Excel or MATLAB colors. I think it triggers people's brains to say, this was done quickly or whatever. Yeah, but that's it for me. That's a little bit of an intro to Inkscape.
All right, before we wrap things up here, I just want to say thank you again to Dr. Summers for sharing all your editing skills with us today. And we've prepared a little token of our gratitude for your help today, but we don't have it with us right now. So you can connect with Julia later on to get that. All right. Okay. Yeah, so next, thank you for everyone for attending, and it was a great turnout, and all your participation really helped carry us through this session, so we really appreciate that. And we do have some take-home materials prepared, just with some links to some YouTube videos and a data visualization textbook and a color palette selection tool. So yeah, if you just follow this QR code here, you can submit your email there and we can send that to you afterwards. Yeah, so just to kind of like recap what we learned today, thinking about aesthetics with our figures, there were 3 elements that we talked about. So the first was color. So we used color to show comparisons between groups or when values meet or exceed certain thresholds. We talked about considering inherent messaging associated with certain colors. For example, red being associated with bad and green being associated with good, and maybe avoiding those colors if that's not the message that we're trying to convey. We also talked about accessibility with our color selections. So considering different color blindness, different media that the figure might be published in. So print versus digital, black and white versus color. And then just avoiding too many competing colors. So we talked about kind of 5 to 7 being the maximum number of different colors that we're using. The next element that we talked about was symbols and lines. So symbols that we use can be modified by shape, size, color, and fill. But it's important to be aware of discipline-specific symbols. So recommendations for symbol selection would be using up to 3 contrasting shapes, then modifying using size, color, and fill. And then using lines as well. We can have dashed or solid and different, and just based on thicknesses as well. And the final element we talked about was positioning and figure elements. So considering white space around and within the figure, and simplifying the figure when possible by excluding unnecessary grid lines and labels. And with all of those aesthetic elements, we can kind of consider our checklist. So that first point on our checklist was how has the key messaging of the figure been highlighted? So we should keep our focus to 1 or 2 key messages to avoid overcomplicating the figure, and use color and white space to make results stand out. The next point was, is the visual hierarchy appropriate in guiding a viewer? So consider where the viewer's eyes go first, and try to bring the main message into the foreground. And lastly, the last question was, is the figure well balanced? So are colors and symbols appropriate, and are elements in a good ratio to the white space? Yeah. So our kind of last concluding point here is, if you enjoyed this event and you're going to be a student in the fall of 2025 with a focus on hydrology, then consider joining us. We have lots of executive positions on our committee opening up in the coming year, so it would be great to have some new faces join us. And the sign-up sheet is on the QR code here, or you can send us an email. I think with that, that's everything. Thanks everyone for coming.